I'm Shana Lipner Grover from Sage Country Herbs, and I'm here with HerbRally to answer some questions about Ask an Herbalist. Let's see. What is my funniest or most memorable experience with a plant? Well, the first story that pops into my head with that is actually a story that I share every single time I do an interview for our field apprenticeship. So this is talking to potential future students to be coming out into the field with me for 6 months. One of the stories that I share has to do with connection. Many years ago when I was a student, I was out in the field with a field school, and one of the plants that we were hanging out with was Devil's Club. And if you don't know Devil's Club, Oplopanax horridum, it is a very tall, 6 to 8 foot plant that is in the Herbalist family, and it is completely covered in spines. The stem, the leaves, especially the underside, very sharp spines. It's also wonderful medicine. It grows mostly in these old growth environments. So I'm sitting next to this plant. I'm in the class. I'm actually doing the class as a second time because I was a teacher trainer. And I'm sitting next to this plant, and I am supposed to be meditating with the plant and connecting with it, deciding whether I'm going to harvest, asking its permission, having that meditative time with the plant. I'm in this beautiful environment. I'm also going through a pretty bad breakup, and I am rather consumed with the emotions around that breakup. And as we all have experienced intense things in life, that your brain gets kind of hijacked to deal with that. So finally I was thinking like, okay, I've been sitting here long enough. I'm going to get ready to do some harvesting. So I go to stand up, and I'm wearing a crocheted hat on my head. And all of a sudden my crocheted hat is at my feet. And I was like, wait, what? I bent down to pick my hat up because the plant had actually grabbed my hat. When I bent down to pick my hat up, my shirt slid up on my low back, and the plant scratched me on my low back. This plant communicated very clearly, you are not harvesting me today. You are not emotionally present enough to do this. And because of the really wonderful ethical teachings of the Columbine School of Botanical Studies, I did not harvest on that day because that plant did communicate really clearly, and I have never, ever forgotten that experience. All right, let's see. Another question I'd like to cover is, when teaching a group, how do you handle someone who questions your material? I've been teaching pretty consistently for around 20 years now, maybe even a little bit more, and this happens. It absolutely happens. And one of the issues I think a lot of beginner teachers face is the anxiety comes from, what if I can't answer a question? To me, the proper response is, if I don't know the answer, I don't know, but I'd be more than happy to look into it. Or, that's a really interesting question, and I don't have a set answer for that. When somebody questions what I am saying, or the material I am presenting, I think the easiest way to diffuse the situation is to say, what cultural reference are you using to question my researched or anecdotal experience? The coolest part about herbs, in my personal opinion, is that herbs are medicine for the people of the earth. All indigenous cultures have had relationships with plants. I mean, let's face it, we all have relationships with plants, every single person on the planet, because we drink coffee, we drink tea, we eat food that grows from plants. So everybody has a relationship with plants. So if somebody really questions my experience or, my anecdotal teachings, my question to them is, what is your background experience to be questioning? Because ultimately, there is no right or wrong way specifically to work with plants. Now, of course, if you're coming from a very scientific background, then yeah, of course, there's going to be some wrong ways to do things because it's not scientifically researched. But there's been many, many years of humans working with plants without that scientific background. And it doesn't negate the idea of making a cup of tea to help with your sore throat. So I really like to make sure people understand the big picture of herbs is worldwide. It's many, many cultural references, and that we can actually learn from all. I love being an herbalist. One of my favorite parts about being an herbalist is the fact that I get to be a forever student. I'm never going to learn every herb on the planet. I'm never even going to get the chance to try every herb on the planet or be introduced to every herb on the planet. And that means that I get to be a forever learner, which means that I get to keep my brain firing and keep living my life with that excitement and wonder. Advice for working the business side of herbalism. What I say to a lot of my younger students in general is no matter what you're interested in, stumble in that direction. Volunteer, participate, grow a garden, be involved in every aspect of whatever it is. If it's herbalism, great. Work with other people who are plant lovers as well. The coolest thing about being into plants is that it is so multifaceted. Someone could be an arborist, they could be a landscaper, they could be a farmer, they could be a gardener, they could work at a botanical gardens or volunteer. There are so many different ways to have a life that is interactive with plants. And that means that there is some point of connection with a lot of different people that love plants, or that have, even if they don't say it like that, they've based their life on being involved with plants. Now we get to my advice for the business side, and that is really know what it is that lights your fire. Really know what it is about herbalism and about your business that makes you really want to dive in every single day. Because a lot of people love the growing of herbs or the making of medicine, but as they make their businesses bigger and bigger, they find they get a bit drowned by the jumping through the red tape or making sure that you're certified, or all of these different aspects of, maybe it's the money, maybe it's the taxes, it's all of this other aspects that take you away from actually having your hands in the dirt, smelling of plants. My advice is to just make sure when you are creating your business, making sure that your role in that business keeps you loving what you do. What is one of my most profound experiences with a plant? Many years ago, I was down in Southern California with the Columbine School, with their Southern California Botanical Adventure. And I had done that multiple times, a couple of years in a row. And we had gone to this place. It was a perfect cross-section of high desert and chaparral and sage scrub. It's like this perfect cross-section of 3 primary ecosystems. And it like looks desert, but then there's springs. And it just blows your mind because you're hiking amongst cactus and all of a sudden here's like a bunch of willow, and like willow grows by water and you're like, wait, what's willow doing here? And it's a really beautiful place. Well, then I didn't live here at the time. I traveled here to study it. Then years later, I moved here, and that's when I started the Sage Country Herbs business and our botanical field apprenticeship. And I was going out to all these different places to find places where I was going to be taking my field students to study local ecology. And one of those places was this very same place. I remembered I had gone there, but it had been like 10 years since I had gone there. And I remember I'm walking along this sandy trail, and everything is feeling really familiar. I'm seeing these plants that I totally recognize, this ecosystem, the horizon, it all looks so familiar. And then I come upon this point where this one plant, look at him, like, I know you. And it's as if, it doesn't always happen like this for me, but it was as if this plant literally was like, hey, you know me. And I was like, oh, I smell the leaf. I do know you, Uriodictyon trichocalyx. This is the a beautiful yerba santa, a native yerba santa to Southern California. And absolutely gorgeous plant, whether it's in flower or not. Deep green, resinous leaves on the top, downy white, covered in little hairs on the bottom. Such a sweet resinous scent. So beautiful. And it was so cool to just have a plant be like, hey! Another story with a plant that I would like to share is my respectful relationship with the plant poison oak, Toxicodendron diversalobum. So a lot of people will say, oh, I'm not allergic when they're introduced to poison oak. But the thing is that you have to be careful about saying that. I was not reactionary to poison oak for most of my herbal career, most of my beginning life, until I was about 28, when we went on what we lovingly refer to as the death hike. Obviously, no death happened, but it certainly could have. And this was a hike. It was in Arizona. It was a long hike. It was on private property. It was amazing. But when we got to our destination after 6 hours of hiking, what it was a waterfall from a spring that just bubbled up. And the whole area looked like Oregon, but we were in Arizona. It was absolutely beautiful. Our guide was very experienced, and he had a rope tied around a rock at the top of the waterfall. That's what we hiked up to, the top of the waterfall. And he expected us to just use the rope and shimmy down a 20, 30-foot waterfall, to which, if you're experienced with that, there's no harnesses here, by the way. Maybe that's possible for him, but not for me and my now husband. We were like, we're not really comfortable with doing that, especially after hiking for 6 hours, because that means it's 6-hour hike back in. So what we... other option was to hike up and around and slide down the hillside over there on all those dead branches. Okay, we'll do that. You know what woody branches love to grow around water? Yeah, poison oak. But there were no leaves, so I didn't recognize it. So we just went up and we slid down, and we had a grand time. It was beautiful, beautiful, amazing. The water, it was a hot day. The water was nice and cool, but not too cold. It was a beautiful, beautiful day. And then the hike back was pretty intense. We had gotten up at 5 that morning to get out there. We didn't get home until 2 in the morning. It was a really long day, and we were really exhausted. And by the next day, I had a big smacker of poison oak on my bum. I also happened, the first nettle sting I ever got was also on my bum. So apparently that sensitive tissue was like, hey, we're experiencing it. So, I mean, the cool thing about being an herbalist is like, we've got this whole, so many options to be able to work with, right? So on one hand, I was like, oh man, that's like my first bout of poison oak. And on the other hand, it was like, oh, okay, I can try all these different things. I tried some tincture of mugwort, some tincture of manzanita. I did some water infusion washes. I did all different things to really address that poison oak. And everything helped a little bit, but ultimately, honestly, the thing that helped me the most at the time was wearing the tightest jeans that I had so that I couldn't itch it. That was definitely the thing that stopped it from getting irritated, because, whoa, is it itchy. So if you fast forward that to now, one of the plants that we meet on the very first day of the Sage Country Herbs Botanical Field Apprenticeship is poison oak in its dormant state. It's just a bunch of sticks that look like they're dead, sticking out of the ground, usually by water. We start there because we can actually get to know this plant. We can create a relationship with this plant, and we can watch it so that we learn about what this plant looks like in all forms, in dormancy, in bare stick, in leaf, in flower, in fruit. We actually key it out when it's in flower and fruit. We key without touching. And then we can watch it as it goes into, as it finishes its fruits, all those leaves turn a brilliant bright red. People say there's no red in the fall time in Southern California. Not true. We may not have a lot of maples turning red in the fall time, but we have a lot of poison oak that turns red. Getting to know a plant, any plant, in all of its forms. This is part of what we do with the field apprenticeship. We talk about creating relationships with plants. Instead of looking at plants as commodities of like, what can it do for me? We look and we teach about looking at plants as friends, as allies. How can I benefit you while I'm hoping that you're benefiting me? Or while I'm learning about how you can benefit me? And what a beautiful relationship that is. When I think about poison oak, how is it benefiting me? Well, it certainly slows me down. It teaches me patience and awareness. It also happens to have a common name called guardian of the forest. And I gotta like any plant that has a common name of guardian of the forest, even if I don't want to touch it. So now, when I see poison oak, which I see it right away, it calls out to me because I'm very susceptible to it. I've gotten it numerous times. Not in the past bunch of years, but when I see it, it waves. And I say, oh, hey, poison oak, and I wave, and I stand clear. I have a relationship with this plant. I can't confuse it with any other plant. I was out on a plant walk years ago, and we were talking about a plant. I think it was the native elder tree. And somebody in the plant walk said, but how do you know? And we said, well, you can look at the compound leaves. You can look at the flat-topped umbel-like inflorescence. And they were like, but really, how do you know? And I thought about it for a moment. And I said, well, I know this is this plant because I have a relationship with this plant. I have seen this plant when it is dormant and when it's in flower and when it's in fruit. And I've sat underneath this plant. I have spent time investing in learning this plant. I mean, I like to think about plants in the same way that we think about making a friend. You know, I can say that like, oh yeah, here's this student that reminds me of my really good friend, Jessie. And I have had that experience. But I would never actually think they were my friend Jessie because I know Jessie through and through. We have been through all kinds of things as friends. So I would never actually confuse Jessie with any other person, even another friend who has that heart connection. Jessie is Jessie. She absolutely stands as who she is. Well, so is poison oak. Poison oak is Toxicodendron diversilobum. And I will not confuse that plant with any other. Okay, and finally, what plant surprised me? That's actually easy. I started my herbal studies living in Oregon. And Oregon has a lot of moisture, generally. And while I liked learning about demulcents, you know, those mucilage-rich, slimy herbs that help with hydration, and they're great for dry, irritated membranes, like a dry, sore throat, or maybe constipation, or heartburn, or sunburn. But in Oregon, I didn't have any real dry issues. You know, I historically have had oily skin and oily hair, and so living in a moist environment, I didn't have any dryness issues. Until I moved to the south. I lived in Arizona for a bit, and I've lived in Southern California in the hills for many years now. And we have these things called the Santa Ana winds, and they come up every once in a while. And when they do, the humidity drops dramatically. And everybody who has any type of dryness issue notices. And people who don't have dryness issues also notice. I had never gotten a bleeding nose in my life. It had never happened until my first experience with Santa Ana's. And all of a sudden my nose started bleeding. And I was completely shocked by it. I didn't understand. But then the more I do teaching, where I'm talking and talking and talking, I realize, and I've started using over the last 10 years where I do a lot of teaching, I use marshmallow tea or other demulcents in tea all the time. And I notice that my throat doesn't get as dried out. I mean, when you're talking, vapor is leaving. So literally moisture is leaving my body. as I'm speaking. And I often do classes where I'm speaking for anywhere from 2 hours to 8 hours. So I am losing a lot of moisture, and having those demulcents around and using them on a regular basis has been like a night and day experience. And then last year, the Santa Anas hit, and I went and I was visiting a friend, and they were talking about how intense their dry sinuses were, and that they've actually had some bloody noses. And I said, oh yeah, that happened to me a bunch of years ago. But they said, oh, well, is it happening to you now? And I said, no, it's not. And they said, well, what are you doing? How do I get this to go away? And I started thinking about it. And I think the main thing that I've done is not consciously to combat those Santa Ana dryness, but it's the drinking of demulcents on a daily basis to combat my dry throat. In the big picture, demulcents are helping all of your mucosal membranes that are dry be hydrated, even when they're not touching it. If I have a dry throat and drinking the tea, that's having a direct physical effect. But demulcents also work by reflex, meaning when you feel that slimy mucilage on your throat, on that dry mucosal membrane, that triggers other mucosal membranes like your sinuses to also secrete thin, healthy mucus to coat and soothe. So I really feel like the drinking of demulcents on a regular basis has changed the integrity of my mucosal membranes so that they are not as reactive. They don't get as congested. They also don't get as dry. They're able to maintain their balance of a proper mucosal membrane. You don't want it too far on the spectrum of dryness. You don't want it too far on the spectrum of congested, heavy, and drippy. You want it right in the middle so that mucosal membrane can move and shift with the dance of life that we're all constantly doing. So thank you so much for joining me for Ask an Herbalist, and thank you to HerbRally for inviting me. I hope you are interested and want to go check out all the things that we have going on at Sage Country Herbs and our Botanical Eyes Community Herbalism Program, or our Eat Your Weeds over there on the website, as well as at HerbRally. See you then.